From UFOs to psychic powers and government conspiracies, history is riddled with unexplained events. You can turn back now or learn the stuff they don't want you to know. A production of iHeartRadio.
Hello, welcome back to the show. My name is Matt.
My name is Noel.
They call me Ben. We're joined as always with our super producer, Paul Mission Control Decant. Most importantly, you are here, and that makes this stuff they don't want you to know. Shout out to all our fellow conspiracy realists in the Northeast and in New Jersey, in the southern part of New Jersey in particular. It is time, finally, once again, for a cryptid episode. And full disclosure, I am biased. This is, for a long time, been one of my favorite cryptid stories. And in fact, we'll see in this episode, this story is somewhat unique in the world of cryptozoology for a number of reasons. I think for a lot of people in the audience today, you may have first heard of this cryptid in an episode of The X-Files, the 5th episode of season 1, called simply The Jersey Devil. Do you all remember this one?
I do, and I am not going to spoil it for anyone who has not seen it. It's first season, I think. It's really early, right?
Yes.
It's a version of the Jersey Devil that's very different than what we'll be talking about here.
Turns out it was Joe Piscopo the whole time.
Kinda.
We're talking about the real Jersey Devil. And, you know, we get a lot of correspondence with people asking us to do more cryptid episodes, to do more paranormal episodes, things like that. Thanks to everybody, by the way, who wrote in about haunted objects. There were some pretty bracing stories we received that may show up in listener mail in a few weeks. But for today, we wanted to dive into some old school stuff they don't want you to know. We're going to look at the purported origin of this cryptid and some of the sightings. And then we're going to ask some questions and see whether we can separate fact from fiction. So what better way to start? Here are the facts.
And the first fact is, if you go to youtube.com/conspiracy stuff, you can watch our video called "Does a Devil Live in Jersey?" That's the first fact.
Still a great title. Still a great title.
And clearly the answer to that is yes. I think many devils probably occupy the area known as New Jersey.
For the thumbnail of that episode, I literally put an extreme close-up of a horse's eye as the thumbnail.
I remember that. Yes.
I always assumed it was a fox's eye, man. This is some real behind-the-curtains info here.
Yeah, it is.
Matt had for a long time I could say we, but it was mainly you, Matt, had this collection of just hundreds and hundreds of close-ups of different creatures' eyes, which was an idea. Oh my God! For another story we were gonna do. But
and also, you never know when they'll come in handy for, like, if you're trying to do a cryptid episode. Sure. Just a close up of an eye,
or like a Christmas card, perhaps. You know, a birthday.
Mm-hmm. Or just, just a business card.
Yeah.
Just hands. What a flex. You give someone your business card. There's nothing written on it. It's just the close up of like a goat's eye.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but there's a reason that I use a horse's eye, and we're going to tell you about it in just a second.
Yes. Yeah. And if you are someone who lives in southern New Jersey, or if you've spent much time in that area, then you already know why we're talking about a horse's eye at the top here. You are doubtlessly familiar with something called the Jersey Devil. True believers who are around even today in 2021, will tell you this creature has been haunting the area and hunting in the area for around 300 years now. That is far beyond the natural lifespan of most large animals since at least the 1800s. All sorts of people, including Napoleon's elder brother, Joseph Bonaparte, have claimed to have seen this mysterious creature in this area through some set of circumstances.
Yeah, Joseph was like the Chet of the Bonaparte family, though, so we don't really hear much from him.
Yeah, or like the Billy, was it Billy Carter? Didn't Jimmy Carter have a brother?
No one knows. I'm sure he did. I'm sure he did. Everyone's got one. Unless you're an only child like me, which, could be a good thing.
Billy Carter, yes, famous as a brewer of alcoholic beverages. But here's the thing. When we talk about the Jersey Devil, first we have to talk about the biggest badger in the bag, the elephant in the room. It does not look especially intimidating. If you look at the most famous sketch of it, which comes from a rash of sightings in 1909, which is part of the big mystery here, what you're seeing looks as much like a political cartoon of the era as it would a naturalist drawing a creature that actually exists. I mean, maybe we can take some time before we go into the written descriptions. Maybe we can just take some time and describe. Why don't you guys tell us what you're seeing and what you think when you look at that 1909 sketch?
It's like a Pokemon of some sort. It's got hooves. It's like a camel's neck and face, bat wings, and little weird, weedy kind of horse hooves. And it's rearing up on back skinny legs that kind of resemble a crane, but it has hooves. And then it has sort of a forked tail, like you might see a demon, a sort of a cliche demon image.
In a lot of ways, it's not a political cartoon, but it is a cartoon put out in a newspaper, the Philadelphia Bulletin. And just for my take, I see an emaciated horse, like that's too thin, with wings and a tail. That's really what I'm seeing, and that's why I use that horse.
Yeah, and the forelimbs, the two front limbs are T-Rex style.
Yes.
So like this clearly would not walk well as a quadruped. And the Jersey Devil is often described as bipedal. One thing that I love about this sketch, the reason I wanted us to have an excuse to talk about it, is I wish more people would talk about the sort of insouciant facial expression of this creature. It looks like it's maybe it's got a friendly Labrador vibe. Right. Like it just heard someone say walk.
Yeah.
Want to walk?
It got a bit of a come hither look, perhaps, or inquisitive. It's just like it wants to be your friend.
It's also eyeing the camera or the beholder, like side eye, like looking right at the camera / the person illustrating it.
Like pose like this?
Yeah.
Stay like this?
Walkies? And by the way, I mean, like the word you used, Matt, emaciated, is absolutely right. But like, there's no way those weird little skinny legs would support the mass that is that upper body and head. And it's also leaning forward. So presumably those little wings are going to have to flap really hard just to keep it balanced out. It's
right, just on the ground.
Just on the ground. Can we really quickly just talk about that ridiculous Jersey Devil drawing that's in the X-Files episode? I think it's like a meme unto itself. It's like a weird, like naked person.
It's a Bigfoot. It's a Bigfoot with boobs. But
a boobfoot.
Yeah, it's a boobfoot.
Well, no, not that one. No, there's just a really dumb stick drawing of like a person with like long hair and like arms kind of out with like no detail. That's the one from the episode.
Oh, maybe I'm wrong.
There's another one I'm seeing like in an AB with a Bigfoot with boobs, but the main one that I remember from the episode is like really stupid looking, like not scary at all. Just kind of like pen drawing of like a dude with his arms out and like long hair.
Well, in that episode, which is clearly fiction, right? In that episode, what they're attempting to do is make the real X-Files explanation for the Jersey Devil be something more human-like, possibly a relic population of Neanderthal, I think, is the big reveal. But that looks nothing like the historical depictions of this devil. The specifics of its appearance vary from one sighting to the next, which often happens in the world of cryptozoology, but it's got some common themes. Just like people might describe Bigfoot differently, but all agree it's tall and hairy, most people will describe the devil differently, but they all agree it's hooved, it's a biped, it has wings. They also say it has the body of something like a kangaroo. Sometimes it has horns or antlers. It has these little tiny arms with clawed hands, and it's got that forked tail that you mentioned earlier, Noel. It also is very fast. It moves quickly, so it's tough to keep an eye on. It is a local farm pest, terrorizing dogs and chickens and other small animals, but not quite. Humans, I think, are a little bit above its predation class. The big thing, the big final commonality that many witnesses describe is a quote, blood-curdling scream. Paul, could you hit us with a Wilhelm? Yeah, something like that.
I love a good Wilhelm.
Yeah, a lot like that. That's where they got the original recording of that. And blood-curdling scream, there's so many interesting, ways to think about that. And we're going to talk about it more in the episode. Like, what could that scream actually be if it is a creature that they're hearing?
It could be rabbits. I see rabbits scream when they die. It's like the only sound they make. They're completely docile and innocuous, silent creatures until they die. And then all of a sudden they let out the most horrific, blood-curdling scream.
Yeah, death screams, people don't talk about it too much, and I think that's because the majority of people in the West are probably not killing the animals they eat these days. But yeah, animals do scream, and they know when they're dying. But the stories of the Jersey Devil have been around for a long, long, long time. That's something of interest in fiction when they explore the devil, but it's never been photographed. It's been the subject of multiple books, films, and of course makes that appearance in the X-Files. So where does this creature come from? When did humans start learning about it? Well, if you look now, what you're going to see are a lot of references to a legend dating back to the early 1700s, and a woman known commonly as Mother Leeds, allegedly a Quaker and the wife of a man named Daniel Leeds. Some historians today believe that Mother Leeds was a real historical figure named Deborah Smith. She was a person of the Quaker faith who was known to live in the area at the time. And so our story goes to a dark and stormy night in 1735. Mother Leeds, already a mother of 12 children, is giving birth to her 13th child in a place called Estelleville, which is about 30 kilometers or a little bit less than 19 miles west of a town called Leeds Point.
Isn't it funny that we've only adopted the metric system in the United States to measure bullet calibers and drugs?
Yeah, that's it.
Sorry, there's a hot take. Putting that out there real quick. No, this birth was rumored to have had some black magic involved. Essentially, that this 13th child. It's funny, the number 13 being significant in certain ways, having been sired by the devil himself.
Yeah, rather than Mr. Leeds, Daniel. And then there's all kinds of stuff that gets lumped into this story where there are some tales that perhaps someone actually cursed the birth or cursed the mother, Mrs. Leeds, like a clergyman or Leeds herself, like cursed the infant before, like as it was being born or just before the birth. Some have reported, or at least there are tales, that the infant was born, and when it was born, it was deformed in some pretty terrible way.
Yeah, which, definitely happens at this time in history, as well as in the modern day. Children can be born with any number of things that might be considered minor to major abnormalities, stuff like something like a cleft palate, or, actually a lot of children are born polydactyl. Did you guys know that? They have an extra digit or two on their hands, and they're just removed at birth in many countries. So as you're listening now, if you want to do this, your mileage may vary. Yeah, no guarantees, but take your hand and check for scars. Sort of, if you look at the side of your hand where your pinky is, and you go a little south toward that kind of plumper part of your palm, along the edge there, there is a small but not insignificant chance that you may see a light vertical scar. If that is the case, and you're in contact with your parents, feel free to ask them. You might have been a six-fingered kid.
Tough questions. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and also people died from fairly curable things very often. So having 13 children it's still a lot, but the need to have more children existed in that time.
Yeah, because it's also a source of free labor, right? Also consider the very high, unfortunately, the high probability of infant mortality when compared to the modern day. So if you wanted to guarantee the likelihood of your lineage continuing, then you would want to have more than one child. You'd want to have as many as economically and physically feasible. But that's the story. We'll stay in the legend mode here before we poke holes in anything. So in some versions of the story, this kid is born normal, healthy, for all appearances, at least at first, but then soon after its birth, it changes form, it's morphing, it's growing wings, it's sprouting hooves and horns or antlers, and it's something really interesting is going on with its head. It's elongating, it's becoming more equine than human, and this creature, this child, whatever it may be, it's freaking out. Birth is one of the most traumatic things a human being will experience. And immediately after this, apparently young boy, literally, is experiencing a second very traumatic event, transmogrification. It flies into the air. It lets out that soon to be infamous blood-curdling shriek. And it either kills a midwife or it kills Mother Leeds and zooms up the chimney and lights out for the woods, never to return, but to be seen in the barrens of New Jersey for centuries to come.
That's important to note. It is the Pine Barrens, like
right.
The legendary Pine Barrens of Jersey.
Sopranos rears its head again. So culturally important. Sorry, I'm a huge fan. I've been on my yearly rewatch. Great episode. But yeah, it's true. This is like a very kind of, think about it now. Like you think of New Jersey as being super industrialized and developed, obviously, but there are still parts of it that are still pretty rural, and this part is it remains that way, pretty rugged, and great place for the mafia to hide bodies,
or for maybe someone or a group of people who worshipped different things.
Yep.
To be a little more isolated.
Exactly.
Just if that part of the story was true.
Absolutely. If the occult does have a piece here or place here, and it's true at this time, it was also much easier to go off the grid because very little of what we would understand as a grid existed. You could keep secrets, but I would argue it would be an order of magnitude more difficult to keep secrets or aberrant behavior under wraps in a township because there were so few people. They were almost all incredibly religious, or we would consider them so today. They were in each other's business, and they kind of had to be to survive. But still, yeah, it was a very different world. And people were the primary mode of communication was oral communication, right? Word of mouth. And when we are in a world where the primary currency of communication is oral storytelling, oral communication, then we see the telephone game ramp up to full speed almost immediately. That's why there's so many different versions, variations, and additions to this story. Like there's one really interesting one that doesn't get a lot of love in the modern day. The idea is that upon the discovery of Mother Leeds, or the midwife's body, a band of local clergy, maybe if we're styling on it, one of the clergymen who cursed the child, they get together, they posse up, and they go into the woods, into the barrens to hunt and or exorcise this creature. There's no report really on what happened to that group, if they ever existed, except that they were ultimately unsuccessful. This would be a fantastic horror film. How has someone not made it yet? You know what I mean? You got all the heist elements. You got the folklore. Mm-hmm. You got a monster.
You got a cult, potentially, like some kind of secret cult.
Put a cult in there.
The devil in the woods. Yeah.
I feel like that movie has been made. We've just never heard of it before or seen it.
Or it's just in a slightly different configuration. I mean, these are all kind of like classic tropes for B horror movies.
Yeah, I'm just imagining Shudder just made something and it went into Shudder and now it's gone.
That's what happened.
Yeah, so let us know if that's out there. I, for one, would love to watch it, especially if it's really bad.
Yes. I just want to put this out there. If you go to jerseyhistory.org, you can read kind of a collection of everything we just mentioned there, of different versions of the story, if you're looking just to get the full backstory.
Yeah. And no, at this point, a lot of those stories are not traceable to a primary source because they arose from this method of, or from this time in which people were swapping rumors, basically,
exactly,
and gathered around the fireplace at night, telling their kids there would be consequences to being bad. But that's a trope. And to steal an awesome pun from my friend Victor, we're all about supporting the tropes here on Stuff They Don't Want You to Know.
Thank you for your service.
Yes. And that's, again, credit where it's due. But
sounds like some troped up charges to me, but okay, let's keep going.
Yes. Let's see where we could go with tropes today. So ordinarily, folks, and especially if you're a fan of cryptids, you know this would be where the trail goes cold. Cryptids that have specific legends and origin points usually end up becoming commodified. They become draws for tourists, like Mothman, right, in West Virginia, or they become the subject of tongue-in-cheek celebrations for the locals, like Mothman in West Virginia. But the story of the Jersey Devil is a little bit different. It's distinct because we may know much more about the origin of this cryptid and its story than legend would have you believe. So today's episode, now that we have all the facts down about the legends, what is the truth about the Jersey Devil? We'll tell you after a word from our sponsors. Here's where it gets crazy. So before we dive in, wait, have you guys been to New Jersey? Matt, Noel?
Oh, gosh. I feel bad. I know I've passed through.
The Turnpike?
Yeah, that's it. Not any. No, I went to we all went through Jersey together in a car. What were we up there doing? What were you doing, guys? I'm completely blanking. I have a distinct memory of stopping at Roy Rogers at that big, huge rest area on the New Jersey Turnpike.
We went on a tour of the Northeast in a Ford SUV.
That's right.
I remember this because I drove.
No, you did.
Because my name was on the thing for a couple days, and then we got it switched to everybody. Anyway, yeah, we drove a lot around that area.
That's what it was. Yep,
but I've spent quite a bit of time in Elizabeth, New Jersey, which is close to Jersey City, like the it's close to New York, but never in the Barrens.
Never in the Barrens. Yeah, New Jersey is one of those states that has that can be a very different experience for people depending on what part of it they're in, right? Like many people simply transit through New Jersey on the Turnpike. That was some of my initial experiences there as well. But not for nothing is it called the Garden State. There is a lot of natural beauty there. And if you were in the Jersey area before the early 1900s, especially if you were there before 1909, which is important. We'll explain why. It's a key year. We'll get to it in a moment. But if you were there in the early 1900s, you've gone back in time, you had the choice, for some reason, you picked New Jersey. You might be surprised to learn that you would almost never hear the phrase Jersey Devil. Instead, you would hear about the exact same thing with the exact same reports of cloven hooves in the snow and mysterious, large, flying, shrieking creatures. But this thing would be called the Leeds Devil, or the Devil of Leeds.
Yeah, because it's focused on that tale in the family. It hasn't been exploded out into this whole states thing yet. Yeah,
exactly. So this Leeds Devil, the name would be either in connection with a local farm owned by the Leeds family or with a southern New Jersey town called Leeds Point, which is still around today. If you look at it, you can orient yourself to Atlantic City. Leeds Point is best described as this small protuberance into the swampy shallows of the Great Bay. It's just north of Atlantic City. It's surrounded by the Pine Barrens that Matt mentioned earlier. The Pine Barrens are 1 million acres of very dense pine trees where you can very easily become lost or very easily hide a body. You could, if you're a teenager, you want to go somewhere and like drink underage, smoke a little weed. Pine Barrens might be the place. I'm just saying it's easy to not get caught.
Well, yeah, it's also easy to get lost, I mean, as is evidenced by that Sopranos episode. So leave a breadcrumb trail or whatever. But Leeds Point was named after a gentleman by the name of Daniel Leeds, who was the surveyor of the land. And he eventually attained ownership of it via a grant. Daniel Leeds was an Englishman who immigrated to the U.S. in 1678. Spent most of his adult life publishing the American Almanac. He created this publication as well, and it continued to print new issues until his retirement in 1716, and he then passed the business down to his sons.
Yo, just quick shout out. He immigrated to the colonies.
Excuse me. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, he immigrated to the colonies. He also, as we'll find, had some political ambitions and opinions that would come back to bite him. It makes sense that he would be a person of note because he is publishing and therefore controlling written communication. And I know I'm hammering home the differences between the primacy of oral communication versus the rise of commonly understood and disseminated written communication, but it's important for stories like these. You're thinking perhaps, oh, an almanac. I've heard of that. Those were very popular in early colonial history that later becomes American history. But I thought Benjamin Franklin wrote the almanac. Who's this Daniel Leeds guy? Well, there's kind of a Coke Pepsi situation because Benjamin Franklin wrote an almanac called Poor Richard's Almanac. And in 1735, he even gives Leeds a shout out in a very snooty way. He calls Leeds, quote, the first author south of New York. We're including that fact because it is important. It does further confirm that Daniel Leeds, who is mentioned in the legend, is a real person. And the next arc of the story, so like we have that established, right? The next arc of the story in the public sphere for the Jersey Devil really begins in 1909. There's a flurry of newspaper reports about people who are certain they've sighted the devil or the Jersey Devil. And these reports are interesting because they're not reports that say some people have said they've seen something weird in the sky. There's specific police officers cited, members of fire departments, local political officials. They're all saying, I saw something. It was wonky. Out of these dozens and dozens and dozens of stories, they're all happening in the same rough area, right? This Pine Barren area, and they're all happening around the same time. And this led people like Brian Dunning over at Skeptoid to say, based on just the physical writing about this at this time, the New Jersey Devil may actually be one of the world's most well-documented cryptids. And of course, being well-documented and being real are not necessarily the same thing. Like, look at the extensive sophistication and thoroughness of Wikipedia entries about things like the Transformers or Star Wars. They're very well documented. They are also not real. I feel like that's an approachable comparison. You know what I mean?
No? I think that works. No, yeah. I think that works.
Matt, are you an Optimus Prime extremist?
No, not at all.
Do you see a truck and think that might be an alien robot?
It's
too much
really,
of a face.
It's when I see those Jeeps, they look like Jeep Wranglers, but they've also got a truck bed on them. You ever seen those?
I would call those abominations is what I would call those.
Well, when I see those, I'm like, that shouldn't be like that. Something's up with this vehicle.
Yeah, it's hiding something. It's very sus. Very sus.
It makes sense. I also, there's something about automotive design where you can clearly see the intention was to have multiple things going on at once. And sometimes those become the best argument for having a vehicle that's just the one thing.
Yeah.
It's okay for a truck to just be a truck.
You're right.
Right?
Those in PT Cruisers, those are the only ones that I feel are sus. So
don't care for those cube things either, just for the record.
Oh, the Scion?
Yeah, man. No, don't like them.
It was a weird time for everybody, but I wish everyone the best. Tell us the weirdest cars you've seen, because they're like cryptid autos, I guess. So there's a problem though. There's a problem with this story, this Jersey Devil story, this legend. Even after we accrue some basic historical facts, it is an impossible story according to its own timeline. First, Daniel Leeds, real dude, almanac maker, local tastemaker. He passes away in 1720. That's about 15 years before 1735, when the devil was allegedly born. Secondly, as historians and researchers are wont to do, later humans started prying into Daniel Leeds' love life, and they learned some stuff that applies to this legend.
Yeah, first thing you should know is that he was with a woman named Anne Stacy. She unfortunately died while giving birth to a child. So he was married to this woman. She died during childbirth. We can already see that perhaps there's the seed of some part of this story, just the act of childbirth and a death. After her death, Anne Stacy's, he married a woman named Dorothy Young. And guess what? They stayed married until he passed away in 1720. So there was, what was the woman's name? There was Miss Smith, who became Deborah. Right. Deborah Smith, who became Mrs. Leeds, allegedly, according to the story. At least on paper, there's no record of that person in connection with Mr. Leeds.
Right. So that person did exist, but they were not getting down, making the Jersey Devil with two backs, at least not her and Daniel Leeds. So there's another guy I want to introduce to this story much later. His name is Professor Fred McFadden of Coppin State University over in Baltimore. He did the work. He dug deep into everything you could find about the life of Daniel Leeds, and then also into the earliest mentions of the devil in some form in print. And some of McFadden's work was published in a book in 1973 called South Jersey Towns, History and Legend, the kind of book that you would see maybe for sale in the gift shop of a regional bed and breakfast. And it turns out that this date of 1735 that people ascribe to the legend comes from the earliest print reference to a quote, devil that McFadden could find. But the location of this devil was given as Burlington. That's tricky because Burlington, at this time, is the name of a whole county or region. It's not the name of a specific town. Additionally, there aren't any contemporary sources connecting Daniel Leeds, the man, or either of his wife to a devilish character of any sort, any shape, form, or fashion. So even this guy, professional historian McFadden, was only able to speculate and say, okay, maybe this devil mentioned from 1735 in Burlington is somehow a predecessor of the same creature that gets popularized way later in 1909. So the legend doesn't hold up to the timeline or the historical facts as we know them, which means we have to ask, where does the story of the devil really begin? We have an answer. This is not just a tease. We do kind of have an answer. We'll tell you after a word from our sponsors. We're back. Some of our more cynical folks in the crowd today may have listened to the first part of this episode and said, you know what? I'll tell you, who needs fake monsters when we have real politicians? That might seem unnecessarily edgy, but it is a good point, and it plays a huge role in this story.
It sure does. It turns out that the mystery of the Jersey Devil could well lie in the murky world of propaganda, or at the very least, smear campaigns, bad PR, let's call it. Daniel Leeds was an editor and local politician, which means, of course, He had enemies. Anybody, that's a double threat. He had the power of the press and he was a politician. So he had many opportunities to make enemies. Most notoriously, Leeds filled a position serving as deputy to one Edward Hind, the Lord of Cornbury. Or Lord Cornbury. I love that. He was the colonial governor of New York and New Jersey under Queen Anne. And in 1708, Lord Cornbury was recalled to England because he was so incredibly unpopular. And therefore, Leeds, by association, was also unpopular, and he withdrew from public office and never again served in politics.
Yeah, that's the thing. He's a British loyalist, which is not a particularly popular political stance. It's in fact an increasingly unpopular one as we get closer and closer to the Revolutionary War. He was then known, he had kind of a stigma as the deputy of this disgraced governor. And so he became a scapegoat in a lot of ways. This is someone that you can publicly deride. In fact, people who are supportive of the cause of independence can bond together by hanging out and talking trash about this guy. If we can all agree this one guy's a dick, then fine. Let's have another round of mead and talk revolution, right?
Let's have some mead and talk Leeds.
Yeah, meads on Leeds. So we don't know if they were drinking mead, but we shouldn't let the facts get in the way of a good story, which is sort of a thematic through line here. He was open to ridicule. Add to this, it seems that several of his real children were unfortunately born with mental disabilities. This also made him an easy target for bad press from unscrupulous muckrakers and so on. So this becomes a political attack, right? We're demonizing this guy's kids. We're also attributing characteristics to him through this story, right? It's quite possible, and this is speculative, but it's quite possible, for instance, that the story of a child of the devil not being the child of Daniel Leeds and the inclusion of horns could have been a visual reference to cuckolding, for instance, right? This is the kind of symbolic language that would be used and is still used in a different way in political cartoons and satire today. By the time the story starts blowing up in the 1800s, Leeds is dead. He passed away, but his name is still familiar with people who are alive, and his name is intimately associated with British loyalists. So it's still a great target for the press, because when they read Leeds, they immediately think of that. And then when they read devil, then, it gets even juicier because you drop the D word. Fast forward, 1909, that deluge of sightings hits the news. But by this point, a lot of people have lived and died. No one really cares too much about Leeds. The U.S. is already a thing and has been for a while. So the connection lost some of its power. The brand name, if we want to think of it in that way, shifted from Leeds Devil, which was no longer serving its purpose, to the Jersey Devil, which now is something people can more clearly associate, right? So what gives with 1909? How did this legend suddenly become a piece of newsworthy reporting for multiple outlets?
Well, there's a fellow named Joe Nickel, who is an investigator and writer of sorts. And according to him, it all goes back to a fun little hoax, very clever hoax, that was kind of building off of the work that the muckrakers had done previously to Mr. Leeds. And we've got a little quote here. In January 1909, the monster was revived by a hoax. Displayed in a private museum in Philadelphia, the creature was actually a kangaroo outfitted with fake wings affixed by a harness. To make it leap at spectators when the curtain was drawn, a boy hidden at the rear of the cage prodded the unfortunate animal with a stick.
So now it's almost like a circus sideshow, or something you see in Ripley's Believe It or Not. The curtain,
yes,
pay your nickel or whatever, the curtains, it probably wasn't a nickel, it's probably cheaper. And the curtains pulled, and then all of a sudden, blood-curdling scream, flapping wings. Thank God it's in a cage. Haha, that's great. Let's get funnel cake or whatever.
Yeah. Well, it certainly explains the illustration of the Jersey Devil, don't you think?
Yes, I agree. It's, but the thing about this one is we don't know. We know it really happened. Nichols' work is sound, but we don't know the specific date of this exhibit. And it sounds to me like, this is only my opinion, it sounds to me like the amount of trouble they went to on this, getting a kangaroo body, for one, it sounds like it was an attempt to capitalize on an existing craze instead of one person single-handedly trying to resurrect this legend, which might be true because back to historian McFadden, he found a report from an archivist in Gloucester County, a guy named R.C. Archett. And R.C. Archett was able to track down a photograph from 1908 that allegedly shows the cloven hooves of the Jersey Devil. Like it walked up on someone's porch and it left these hoof marks. This is the beginning of the period when all these footprints started being reported in the press. And that's the important thing. Because remember at the top we said there have been many reports, but there have been no photographs. There have been a lot of photographs of proposed Jersey Devil hoof prints. But something was definitely leaving footprints all around this area. As of 2021, it appears that we will probably never know what set off this renewed interest in the Leeds Devil, but there was definitely a political aspect to it. It is quite possible that this thing was a campfire tale, or it began as a political satire, or shortly after becoming a legend, it became used as a political satire, and then later people forgot it was satire, and then mass hysteria kicked in, and people were seeing things and, you know, equating it with the first thing they would have thought of, which is the tale of this Jersey Devil. But we're talking cryptids, and we know that when we're talking cryptids, many sightings of animals that are attributed to cryptids later turn out to be misidentified natural creatures. So the first question you have to always ask yourself when you hear a story about a cryptid is, could it be based on a known creature? That's especially important in the story of the Jersey Devil. It's distinct because it has basically an origin point that's somewhat, you know, closer to the modern day. Secondly, it has a specific sort of run of time in the news and in reporting. But third, it's pretty distinct because of the sheer amount of time here. Given the length of time the story's been around, the number of sightings across that period of time, again, ballpark 300 years, it's incredibly unlikely that a single individual organism on land of this size could be responsible for every single sighting, right?
Yeah, but at the same time, I mean, like, you know, it's one of those fish out of water type stories potentially where maybe, you know, we know some lizards, for example, live very, very, very long lives, not to mention things like Galapagos giant tortoises that can live up to 85 years, 100 years sometimes. You know, Asian elephants, Ben, you pointed out, can live up to 86 years. But not to mention, though, finding an animal that can live longer than 300 years is a very tall order, not to mention one that would be able to survive in this climate. The ones that we're talking about that would live this long would not do well in the Pine Barrens of New Jersey.
Right. Yeah. Land animals, especially, you know, there are maritime animals that can live a very, very long time. And you make a great point about the Galapagos giant tortoise, but it doesn't exactly fit the description, and it's not built to live in the Pine Barrens.
Guys, it's a demon. It's immortal. It can live as long as it wants to, I think.
Demon rules. Yeah, maybe that explains it. You're right. So demonology, demon biology aside, if something like this existed, if it were secular, it would almost certainly mean there would have to be some sort of small breeding population. Maybe one that's occasionally on the move, which might help explain why these sightings seem to rise and fall across time. If there is a mundane explanation for the Jersey Devil, I I propose that we consider our number one suspect the sandhill crane. I've included a picture here just to get a look at it. All right, what you're seeing, guys, if you look at this picture, you're seeing two sandhill cranes chilling at a gas station. No other context.
Yeah, I would run.
Yeah, they can be pretty tall. They're ungainly looking. They're land-dwelling birds. If you pull up that picture of the Jersey Devil and you put it next to if you pull up that sketch rather of the Jersey Devil and you put it next to this photo of the sandhill crane, then you can see some interesting kind of commonalities. They both look like rather ungainly bipeds. Technically, they both have wings, although the cranes are folded. They've got the beak could look like a slightly elongated head. These things are also pretty crazily big. Like they can be up to 4'6" in height, and the wingspan can stretch to over 7 feet. So you would notice this thing if you're in the woods and you see it taking off, or you see it landing, or you see it just chilling, like it's chilling outside of the gas station there. I love that picture because I wonder what they're waiting on.
Yeah, somebody would drop some Doritos. But it is really compelling when you imagine being out in the woods, especially at night in that area, and you just caught a glimpse of something. It's just far enough away. The light that you have isn't quite reaching it. You've got some moonlight. You see something with huge wings just take off, and you know, if you just see it enough, but you can't make out the exact dimensions, the exact shape, I can imagine that sandhill crane being, misattributed to something much more sinister.
Yeah, exactly. And also, some populations of sandhill crane are migratory. So this is just a thought experiment. I want to see if you guys think this is possible, plausible, or total bunk. Sandhill cranes, especially the migratory populations, in the winter, they'll band together to form things called survival groups. And these are interesting because it's not all related sandhill cranes. For the good of, just a style on it, for the good of the gander, unrelated cranes will all gather together in this mass, meaning that for a period of time, specific areas of their range may suddenly become home to thousands of cranes, devils, at once. So you could have grown up in this area, 1800s, early 1900s, and then been walking around your normal woods and saw something unusual. There's a crane you misidentified, and you talked to someone else about it, and they've also seen something. They're like, yeah, it's crazy. There's this huge thing in the sky flying. I'm freaked out. They're everywhere. Did you see? It's in the paper. The papers are writing about it, which makes it real. The cranes could also be partially responsible for all those 1909 pictures of hoofprints or footprints, right? Because as snow melts, you know this from our Bigfoot episodes, as snow melts, any kind of footprint left by an animal will become deformed. Often it can look bigger than it was originally. And there's a little bit of like circumstantial textual evidence. There's a guy named Alfred Heston in 1926. He was writing in Jersey Wagon Jaunts. He said that he spoke with residents of Salem who called the 1909 creature that they also believed in, they called it the ostrich devil.
Ooh, interesting. Huh. Yeah, I'm not digging all these bird comparisons. These are the creepiest ones too. Birds with that are tall and powerful with skinny legs and gangly necks. No, thank you. No,
you got to go for the neck and stay away from the legs.
Fair.
But you can see how ostrich devil, would make sense if you were observing just a bunch of these strange birds that you had never seen before.
Yeah,
right.
They're terrifying.
Right. And there are other possible animal origins. There are things like the common barn owl. There's a guy named J.A. Singley who was writing with a delightfully skeptical tone to the Galveston Daily News. And he said, the Leeds devil, this is 1887, he said the Leeds devil that is described as a bugaboo bird is probably just a barn owl. And we have a quote.
Okay, I'm going to try to muster my way through this, guys. The bird has an uncanny appearance generally, agreed. And this, aided by a lively imagination, they are the stuff of nightmares, has probably originated the blood-curdling story of the Leeds devil. Dude, look, I know I play up my fear of birds a little bit. I'm certainly not like totally terrified of birds. I wouldn't necessarily run, but if a crane, let alone a gaggle of cranes, whatever you call that, it should be a murder of cranes, was assembled, or ostriches or something like that, and they were coming at me, yeah, my imagination would do serious tricks, and I would absolutely run, and that would haunt my dreams for the rest of my life. So I think I'm with this explanation.
Guys, have we heard the Sandhill cranes sounds? Do we know what they sound like?
Bet it's blood-curdling.
I don't know. I'd be interested to play something here and see if it what everyone thinks.
Matt, I'm so glad you asked. I proudly present what could be either the Sandhill crane or the Jersey Devil or both. Listen along, folks. Let us know if you think this is blood-curdling.
Can you imagine a whole gaggle of those? Or just that, like you were saying, you're describing large groups, and that sound is just occurring?
Certainly would curdle my blood just fine.
Yeah, I was going to check on everybody's blood. That's a weird sentence out of context. But yeah, you can see, like at first, when it's just one, it doesn't sound too crazy, but it would be unexpected. But then you hear multiple things and you think they're all coming from the same creature, then that's pretty nuts. I do also want to point out, for anybody who's feeling pedantic in the crowd today, yes, the group name for a group of cranes is a sedge, SEDGE. Also, those group name things you always hear, like a parliament of so-and-so, a gaggle, and so on, those are not scientifically accepted. Like actual ornithologists and biologists get, I don't want to say weirdly offended, but they're very not fun about it. And I love those group names for things. I think they're delightful.
Like a basket of kittens. Nobody ever uses that anymore.
I'm sorry. Explain.
What? If you got multiple kittens together, it's a basket of kittens. That's
really?
Okay.
No, I'm making it up, but I'm hoping that somebody will use it.
You're trying to make basket of kittens happen, Matt?
Yes.
I love it.
I applaud you. It's much more wholesome than a burlap sack of kittens. Which I'm glad you didn't go that direction. But okay, so that's the call, right? And you can see if we put ourselves back in the 1800s, the early 1900s, you could see how hearing that in an unexpected way and then later seeing a large flying thing could very well persuade you that the crazy campfire story you've heard since you were a child might have some sand to it. But the most interesting part of this line of thinking is simply this: it doesn't solve the riddle. There's no solid proof that dozens and dozens of people in 1909 were seeing cranes and barn owls. And I would argue the further back you go in the history of a region, the more familiar people tend to be with the natural world and the flora and fauna. So it almost seems less likely that after a certain amount of time living in the area, people would still misidentify cranes. So we don't have solid proof. We also don't have solid proof that they weren't all caught up in an outbreak of hysteria.
100%. Yeah. No, there's no question about the hysteria angle. And also, let's not forget, I mean, the fear of Satan, the fear of the devil itself is something we haven't mentioned specifically, or at least a bunch, but that was very, very real. And these were people, it reminds me of the movie The Witch, where people are settling, a very hostile environment. And there's a lot of isolation, especially out in the woods in these pine barren areas. And these are folks who often come from kind of puritanical backgrounds. So it's very easy for this hysteria or this satanic panic to kind of set in. And the idea of there being some sort of demon out in the woods could become very, very real.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a very good point. Belief plays such a huge role in human psychology, and it affects the world around us the same way that AR technology affects your perception of the world, I would argue. And if you take each of these alleged sightings one by one by one, there's always still this tantalizing measure of ambiguity. You look at one sighting and you say, well, yeah, that could have been an owl. Look at another and you say, well, yeah, that could have been a crane. And in some cases, honestly, it could have been some poor schmuck's friends pranking him. You know what I mean? They're like, oh man, Danelle is on acid again today. Let's get out the wingsuit.
Yes.
I don't know if I'm making that story up, but
I love that idea. There's a group of people with a wingsuit and a friend that always does acid.
Yeah. Or, maybe ergot or something. And then
and he never learns. He never learns. So maybe that's where we leave it, because at this point, one thing is for sure: whatever the devil is, whatever it was, humans have had a long, long time to figure it out, and centuries have passed without anyone managing to conclusively solve the mystery. I believe that we have some very good mundane explanations or possibilities, not all 100% proven or even provable at this point in time, but that leads, I don't know about you guys, that leads me to think, has the human species collectively decided not to let the facts get in the way of a good story? If so, I'd just like to say, classic human. It's the sort of thing the species loves to do, and humans have never needed help from a devil to do it.
Hear, hear.
Wow. Okay. Well, I don't know about you guys. Have you ever seen a crane in Atlanta?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Yeah, saw one recently, what is it? There's like a little pond across from Ponce City Market where our office is. It's more than a little pond. It's like a whole cute little area with like a walking trail. And I saw a crane on like perching on like a guardrail in that area.
There are also herons.
That's probably what it was. That's probably what it was. Excuse me.
And they look real weird when they fly, because when they're getting super into it, they lean back their necks and fold them down, so it looks like they have this weird double chin.
Yeah.
This is one of, I think I may have told this story on the show before, but in our backyard there's a very small creek. It's not really a creek, it's just where the runoff water goes. It's got a place to go. And every once in a while back there, you'll hear some weird sounds. We hear some owls near our house every once in a while. But not long ago, Diana was in the backyard and something giant, it was in the middle of the night and dark, something giant spread its wings. She could tell it was wings, but she couldn't see it really well. And it just flew up into the air through the trees. And a couple days later, it was a heron. It's a blue heron, I think, or gray. It looked gray.
Devil. I'm calling it. Devil. Nope. I reversed my entire opinion. It's the devil. It's moving in non-linear time. It's going to come after it. This is going to be the episode that breaks the show. This is the time that we will finally have consequences.
Wow.
It'll be the Jersey Devil that did us in. It's been a wild ride, fellas. It was an absolute pleasure to work with you. If you feel like leaving a comment at our memorial after the devil finishes its work with us, there are any number of ways you can contact us. If one or all of us somehow survives, of course, we'll keep doing episodes. And to do that, we'd love some help from you. So please give us your suggestions. Hang on, this door randomly opened. Keep this part in, Paul. I don't know why this door opened.
Jersey Devil. Cranes are pretty smart, though. They can open doors with their creepy, gangly necks and pokey beaks.
Really?
I don't know.
I guess it depends on the handle.
Velociraptors can in the movie Jurassic Park.
They're directly descended.
They are.
Sorry, I don't know what happened.
Oh, we know, Ben. We just discussed it intimately.
Okay. And let us know if there are any cryptid stories from your neck of the woods that you feel have some sort of explanation, especially if there is an actual undocumented animal out there. We'd love to hear from you. We try to make it easy to find us online.
That's right. We're Conspiracy Stuff on Twitter and Facebook, Conspiracy Stuff Show on Instagram. You can also give us a telephone call. Tell us about that, Matt.
That's right. We have a number. It is 1-833-STDWYTK. When you first call in after you hear Ben's lovely tones telling you to leave a message, please state your name or that which you would like for us to call you. It's a weird way to put it. Whatever name you want us to use when we refer to you. Then leave your message. You've got 3 minutes. If you'd like to say something directly to us or the producers, please leave that at the end of your 3 minutes or, the end of your message. If you've got a story to tell us that's a little more lengthy or maybe needs a couple of links or some pictures, we highly recommend that you reach out to us a slightly different way, the old-fashioned way. You can always reach us at our email. We are
conspiracy@iHeartRadio.com.
Stuff They Don't Want You to Know is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, visit the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.